Alright, so this video is going to cover Objective 7, 8, and 9 for Chapter 13. We're going to take a look at the ventricles and blood-brain barrier and cerebrospinal fluid. And so starting with the ventricular system, so within the brain, and this actually develops really early on, but within the brain there is kind of a set of cavities, which hopefully you know that a cavity is just a space. And so it looks like an actual, like a big structure here, but really what's inside is just open space, okay? And so within these cavities, we have the production, transport, and removal of cerebrospinal fluid. So this is going to help to produce and move that fluid throughout the brain and down into the spinal cord. And so there's 4 ventricles. There's 2 that are called lateral ventricles. And then you have the 3rd ventricle and the 4th ventricle. And then you have the cerebral aqueduct, which is actually going to be a structure that connects the 3rd and the 4th. And so the ventricles are lined by a type of cell called ependymal cells. So back when we covered cells of the nervous system, you have neurons, which transmit the information via action potentials. But then you have cells that are called glial cells, or neuroglia. And the ependymal cells are a type of neuroglial cell. And so their job is to actually produce and help to move the cerebrospinal fluid. So within the ventricles, there's going to be structures called a choroid plexus, and that's where you'll find these ependymal cells. And so these are the cells themselves. These are little cilia, and what they do is they produce the fluid, and then they can beat these cilia back and forth. They're little hair-like structures, and they're able to move that fluid around. And so the cerebrospinal fluid is actually a clear liquid. It's going to fill up and circulate through those ventricles. It's going to emerge into the subarachnoid space where you had those trabeculi, and that's where it actually gets reabsorbed into the blood. And so you have a constant production and circulation and reabsorption that's taking place in those ventricles. And so once again, this is produced by those ependymal cells and the choroid plexus tissues. So you can see over here that there's my choroid plexus. It's going to have those ependymal cells, and they're going to be responsible for secreting that fluid. And so there's 3 major functions. We have protection, so the fluid kind of acts like a cushion. And if you do have injury, hopefully it'll kind of avoid injury that's too severe. It makes the brain more buoyant, and so just like when you get in water, it's like you weigh less, and you're a lot easier to pick up. It's the same kind of concept here with the brain. So by being in fluid, the weight of the brain is reduced, and that helps kind of reduce pressure on the brain. And then it also is responsible for chemical stability. So it's a big solution, and so it helps kind of keep a stable environment chemically for the brain to kind of be within. And so it allows for proper brain function. Now the flow, it's going to start in those lateral ventricles. Okay, we have the choroid plexus that's located in the lateral ventricles. And so it's going to be produced there, and then it's going to flow through these little tiny holes that connect the lateral ventricles to the 3rd ventricle. Now the 3rd ventricle also has choroid plexus, okay, and so there's going to be more cerebrospinal fluid made and added. And then it's going to flow from the 3rd ventricle into the 4th ventricle through that structure known as the cerebral aqueduct, or the aqueduct of Sylvius. And so once again, the 4th ventricle has choroid plexus, and so it's going to increase and add more cerebrospinal fluid to circulation. Now, once it's in the 4th ventricle, it's going to flow out. You have 2 lateral apertures and 1 median aperture. So if we go over here to our picture, you have a lateral aperture there. You have a median aperture down here. And so this is going to allow it to move to other parts of the brain, like the cerebellum. It's also going to allow it to flow downward into the spinal cord. And so once it goes through those apertures, it's going to fill up the subarachnoid space. It's going to bathe the entire brain and spinal cord in that fluid. And within that arachnoid area, in that subarachnoid space, you've got villi. And the villi are going to help to reabsorb it, to put it back into the bloodstream. And so we have a constant production, circulation, and reabsorption. Now, in the event that that circulation, production, and reabsorption is not occurring properly, or the blood, it's not draining properly, what can happen is hydrocephaly or hydrocephalus, which literally means water on the brain or water in the head. And so what can happen is this fluid buildup can lead to increased pressure, and it can cause lots of issues. And so what has to usually be done to fix it is a shunt is surgically inserted, and it helps to drain that fluid elsewhere. And then the last objective that we're covering for this video is objective 9, which is all about the blood-brain barrier. We've actually talked about it before, but the blood-brain barrier is a way to protect the brain from harmful substances. Okay, it's about being very picky about the types of materials that are able to cross into the brain tissue from the bloodstream. And so just to kind of give a little bit of background, when it comes to your tissues and blood flow, the blood flows from the heart into arteries, which branch down into smaller vessels called arterioles. And then you have what are called capillary beds. And capillary beds are very thin, small vessels. They're pretty much just one cell layer thick. And it's in the capillaries where you have your exchange of things like oxygen and carbon dioxide. So all around your major organs, you've got these capillary beds. And then the capillaries are going to turn into venules, which turn into veins that return the blood back to the heart. And so your capillaries are very small vessels. And so this is where normally your exchange happens, but within the blood-brain barrier, we're going to have some unique features that are going to help keep those harmful substances out. And so the blood vessels that are going to the central nervous system have some unique properties. They're going to tightly regulate the movement of substances and ions. They're going to keep big molecules out. And so the idea is that it protects us from harmful things like bacteria or other large molecules that could be damaging to our nervous tissue. And so the way it's going to work is that filtration is going to be increased, and it's just going to be a little pickier about what molecules can go through. So like it said over here, important molecules like water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, smaller medication type chemicals are able to easily pass, but other things are not going to be able to. And so there's 3 different types of specialized cells that help contribute to this kind of picky movement of molecules. One are the endothelial cells, and these are just going to be the cells that line the capillary. Okay, there's just a single layer of cells, but they're going to have these tight junctions that help to make them to where not every molecule can easily cross. And so they're going to exchange the basic movement of substances between the blood and the tissue. You have astrocytes, like we talked about with our neuroglial cells. These are specific to the central nervous system, and so they help to regulate the chemical composition, and they help to regulate the presence of the blood-brain barrier. And so you can see that your astrocytes, they kind of form all around the blood vessel. And then you have your pericytes, which actually wrap around the capillaries as well. And so we kind of have this multi-layer protection of cells. So they wrap around the capillaries, they help in regulating the flow of the blood, as well as the maintenance and the composition of the blood-brain barrier. They're also a type of stem cell that could give rise to smooth muscles. All right, and that's where we're going to stop in this video. We'll come back to finish up the Chapter 13, Part 2, and cover Objective 10.